A stranger in the sand. The sun burned high in the alien sky, casting a golden hue over the endless desert. The wind howled softly, sweeping fine dust across the barren landscape. Ethan Walker stumbled forward, his boots sinking into the sand with every step. His ship had crashed 3 miles back, nothing but flaming wreckage now. His water supply was low. His oxygen levels were steady, for now. He had seen worse. But this planet was empty. No signs of life, no civilization, just silence. Until he saw her, the mysterious discovery. Ethan froze. Lying in the sand ahead was a woman, or at least something like a woman. Her skin was a pale, shimmering gold, marked with strange glowing symbols that pulsed faintly. Her long, silvery black hair spilled around her shoulders, tangled from the wind. She was barely breathing. Her body was still, her lips dry and cracked. She looked like she had been here for days, maybe longer. Ethan's instincts screamed at him, "Leave her." She wasn't human. She could be dangerous. But something about her, he couldn't walk away. Not yet. The impossible decision. Ethan crouched beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak. She needed water. Badly. He reached for his last water supply, a small metal canister strapped to his belt. He hesitated. This was his water. He needed it to survive. She wasn't his responsibility. But then her lips parted. A sound escaped her throat, a whisper in a language he didn't understand. A plea. Ethan sighed. "I'm going to regret this." And then he tipped the canister against her lips. The awakening. The moment the water touched her tongue, something changed. Her body shuddered. Her breathing deepened. The glowing symbols on her skin flared brighter. Ethan took a step back, gripping his weapon just in case. Then her eyes snapped open, bright silver. Not like any human he had ever seen. Her gaze locked onto him, sharp and focused. For a moment, she just stared. Then she whispered something in her own language. Soft, urgent. Ethan frowned. "Yeah, I don't understand that." Her brows furrowed. She tried again. This time, the words were broken, but recognizable. "You saved me." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, you're welcome." She blinked, as if confused. Then her hand moved, gripping his wrist. A sudden shockwave of warmth shot through Ethan's body. His skin burned where she touched him, but it wasn't painful. It was like something connecting. Her silver eyes widened. She inhaled sharply. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "It is done." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean done?" The wind howled louder, swirling around them. And in that moment, Ethan realized. Saving her might have been the biggest mistake of his life. The unbreakable bond. The wind howled through the endless dunes, carrying dust and whispers of a world Ethan barely understood. He stood frozen, staring at the alien woman who had just whispered the most unsettling words he had ever heard. "It is done." A chill ran through him, despite the burning heat of the desert. Ethan took a slow step back. "What do you mean, done?" The woman, Seraya, watched him with glowing silver eyes, something flickering in them. Curiosity, fear, recognition. Her grip on his wrist was firm, but not forceful. Then she let go. The heat under his skin lingered. Something had changed. Something he couldn't explain. The weight of an ancient tradition. Seraya sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her forehead. She still looked weak, her skin duller than before. But she was alive. She exhaled sharply. "You do not know what you have done, do you?" Ethan crossed his arms. "I gave you water. That's it." Seraya shook her head, staring at him like he was a fool. "In my culture," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "to save one's life with your own resources is not just an act of kindness." Her silver eyes locked onto his. "It is a bonding." Ethan's stomach dropped. "You mean, like, a debt?" Seraya's lips pressed into a thin line. No. Ethan frowned. Then what? Seraya took a slow breath and said the one thing he was not prepared for. We are now bound as mates. Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. Wait. What? A marriage he never asked for. Ethan's mind raced. Mate. Marriage. That was insane. Okay, hold on, he said, holding up his hands. That's not how it works where I come from. Seraya tilted her head, confusion flickering across her face. Your people do not honor life debts. Not like that. Ethan ran a hand down his face. Look, I didn't save you for some alien marriage contract. I just didn't want to leave you to die in the sand. Seraya studied him for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was quiet, a little bitter. You truly do not know, do you? Ethan crossed his arms. Clearly not. Seraya exhaled. The moment I accepted your help, the bond was sealed. There is no undoing it. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. That can't be right. There has to be a way out. Seraya's silver eyes dimmed slightly. There is one way. Ethan waited. Seraya looked at him, and then, very calmly, she said, You would have to kill me. The hunt begins. Ethan took a sharp breath. Yeah, not happening. Seraya blinked. You say that so easily. Ethan shook his head. Because I don't kill people for no reason. Something flickered in her eyes, something almost like respect. But before she could respond, a low, distant hum echoed across the desert. Seraya's expression turned to stone. Ethan's instincts flared. What was that? Seraya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned toward the sky. Ethan followed her gaze and froze. A shadow moved across the stars. Then another. And another. Ethan's blood ran cold. Ships. Descending. Seraya's voice was quiet. They found me. The ones who want her dead. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his weapon. Who? Seraya stood up, swaying slightly, her strength still weak. The ones who ended my world. Ethan clenched his jaw. And now they're after you. Seraya's silver eyes burned. They are after us. Ethan stiffened. Excuse me. Seraya turned to face him fully. You are bonded to me now, human. They will see you as they see me. An enemy. Ethan muttered a curse. Great, so I saved your life, and now I'm on a hit list. Seraya smirked. Welcome to my world. The distant hum of the approaching ships grew louder. Seraya's smirk faded. You should leave me. Ethan scoffed. Not a chance. She frowned. You don't understand. If they take me, they will not just kill me. Her voice dropped. They will erase me. Ethan studied her, something in his gut telling him she was serious. She didn't just fear death. She feared something worse. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then we'd better make sure that doesn't happen. The price of survival. The distant hum of warships grew louder. The desert wind carried the sound like a warning. Something ancient, something inevitable. Ethan gritted his teeth. He was not supposed to be in this mess. A simple act of kindness, saving a dying woman in the sand, had turned into a bond he didn't understand and a death sentence he never agreed to. Now the ones who had wiped out Seraya's people were coming, and they saw him as part of her. Ethan adjusted his grip on his weapon. So, do we fight or run? Seraya turned to him, silver eyes glowing. There is no running. The arrival of the hunters. The sky split open as the ships descended, their black hulls glistening in the fading light. Ethan counted 4. No insignia, no markings, silent, deadly. The air shifted, electric, heavy. Then, the first one landed. A ramp descended from its side, and from the shadows, they emerged. Tall, humanoid figures, clad in sleek dark armor, their faces hidden behind featureless silver masks. They didn't move like soldiers. They moved like predators. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his sidearm. Seraya grabbed his wrist. "Don't." Her voice was sharp, commanding. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Seraya took a slow breath. "Because they don't want to fight." Ethan frowned. "Then what do they want?" Seraya turned her gaze back to the approaching figures. Her voice was ice cold. "Me. The one who speaks for the dead." The lead figure stepped forward. Unlike the others, his mask was different. It was lined with golden markings, pulsing faintly in the dim light. Seraya's entire body tensed. Ethan noticed the way her hands curled into fists. He leaned in slightly. "You know him." Her lips barely moved. "He was the one who destroyed my family." Ethan's chest tightened. Then the figure spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't mechanical. It was soft, controlled, dangerous. Seraya of the Lost Line. Ethan felt a flicker of tension from her, but she didn't respond. The figure tilted his head slightly. "You should not be alive." Seraya exhaled. "And yet, here I stand." The masked figure took a slow step forward. Not for long. Then his gaze shifted. To Ethan. Ethan felt it like a blade against his skin. The masked figure studied him too long. Then his head tilted again. "And you bear her mark." Ethan stiffened. Seraya spoke quickly, her voice edged with warning. "He has nothing to do with this." The figure ignored her. "You are bonded," he said simply. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Not by choice." The masked figure chuckled. "There is no choice in fate." Ethan was about to respond when Seraya moved. The choice that changed everything. She stepped between them. Her silver eyes burned. "Leave him out of this." The masked figure didn't move. "You misunderstand," he said. "He is now part of this." His head tilted slightly. "We do not wish to kill him." Ethan tensed. That didn't sound like a good thing. Seraya frowned. "Then why are you here?" The masked figure lifted his hand and pointed directly at Ethan. "Because we need him." Silence. Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, that's gonna be a no from me." The masked figure chuckled again. "Your blood says otherwise." Then Ethan's body burned. The awakening. It was sudden, violent. Heat exploded through Ethan's veins, searing like fire and ice at the same time. His vision blurred. His heart pounded. He staggered. Seraya's eyes widened. She grabbed his arm. "Ethan." Ethan barely heard her. His breath hitched. His skin was glowing, the same golden glow as Seraya's markings. Ethan gritted his teeth. "What the hell is happening?" Seraya's hands tightened on him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "The bond. It's activating." The masked figure's voice was calm. "This is why we need him." Ethan fought against the heat, against the overwhelming feeling of something shifting inside him. Seraya turned back to the masked figure, her voice sharp. "No, he is not part of this war." The masked figure's head tilted again. "You misunderstand." His voice was quiet. "He is the war. The blood of kings." Ethan's body burned. It wasn't fire. It wasn't pain. It was something older, deeper. Like something inside him had been asleep for centuries, and now it was awake. The masked figure watched him closely. Seraya gripped his arm, her silver eyes filled with fear. Not fear for herself. Fear for him. "Ethan," she whispered, "you need to fight it." But Ethan wasn't sure he could. Because whatever was inside him wasn't stopping. It was rising. The ones who knew the truth. The masked figure took a slow step forward. "Your transformation has begun." Ethan gritted his teeth. "I didn't ask for this." The figure tilted his head. "It was never your choice." Ethan clenched his fists. His skin was glowing now. The same markings that pulsed on Seraya's body were appearing on his arms. His heart slammed against his ribs. This wasn't just a bond. It was something more. Something worse. Seraya stepped in front of him. You will not take him. The masked figure exhaled, almost amused. You do not understand, my queen. His gaze flicked back to Ethan. He was never yours to claim. The last hair. Ethan's head pounded. His body felt like it wasn't his anymore. Seraya turned back to him, her voice urgent. Ethan, listen to me. Whatever is happening, you can stop it. Ethan clenched his jaw. How? She hesitated. You have to resist the bond. The masked figure laughed softly. Poor child. Seraya whirled back to him, furious. But the figure simply shook his head. You do not see it, do you? He turned his head slightly, like studying a puzzle. Then his voice dropped to something almost gentle. His blood is not human anymore. Silence. Ethan froze. Seraya's breath caught. The masked figure's words were calm. He is not your mate, Seraya. He exhaled, stepping forward. He is your king. The bloodline that never died. Ethan's pulse slammed through his veins. His head spun. He had spent his life as an outsider, a wanderer. But now, he was something else. Seraya's voice was barely a whisper. No, that's not possible. The masked figure turned to her. Your people were slaughtered, he said simply. Your family burned. Your throne abandoned. Then he gestured toward Ethan. But the bloodline did not end. Seraya shook her head. He is human. The masked figure chuckled. Then why does his blood burn with the mark of the ancients? Ethan staggered. He looked down, and his hands were no longer his own. They were glowing with golden energy. The same golden energy that had once only belonged to Seraya. Ethan's breath hitched. No, no, this wasn't real. The choice that would change the future. Seraya stepped closer to Ethan, placing her hands on his shoulders. You don't have to listen to them, she said. Ethan's voice was hoarse. Is it true? Seraya's lips parted. She didn't know. She had believed she was the last. She had believed her family was gone. But now, Ethan existed, and the markings on his body. They didn't lie. Ethan clenched his fists. I don't want a throne. The masked figure tilted his head. You have no choice. Then softly, the war never ended. It was waiting for you. Ethan's chest tightened. Because in that moment, he felt it. Beyond the desert, beyond this moment. Something else was out there. Something watching. Something waiting. And Ethan finally understood. This wasn't just about Seraya. It was about him. It had always been about him. The throne that calls for war. The desert wind carried whispers of something ancient. Ethan's body still burned from the power surging through his veins. The golden glow of the markings on his arms was fading, but he felt it inside him now. A presence. A connection. Like something had been waiting for him to awaken. Seraya stood motionless, her silver eyes locked onto him, not with fear, but with disbelief. You're lying, she hissed at the masked figure. The figure merely tilted his head. Am I? Ethan clenched his fists. I don't care about your throne. The masked figure chuckled. You think the throne cares what you want. And then, the sand trembled. The arrival of the forgotten ones. Ethan felt it first. A shift in the air, a weight pressing down on his chest. Then, the sky darkened. Not from clouds. From ships. Massive, ancient vessels, their hulls blackened by war, symbols carved into their sides in a language Ethan could suddenly read. Seraya took a sharp breath. No, she whispered. That's impossible. The masked figure turned toward the sky. It is time. A bloodline that was never lost. Ethan's pulse slammed against his ribs. Those ships, he knew them. But he had never seen them before. Memories flickered in his mind. Flashes of fire. Of war. Of a kingdom he had never ruled, but somehow remembered. Seraya's voice was shaking. Those are royal warships. She turned to Ethan, her silver eyes wide. They're here for you. The one who came for a king. A beam of golden light shot down from the lead warship. A figure descended, slowly, deliberately. Unlike the masked warriors, this one did not wear armor. He was tall, draped in flowing robes of deep crimson and black, with a crown-like headpiece made of shifting metallic strands. His face was not human. And yet, when he spoke, Ethan understood him perfectly. You were never lost, my king. You were only waiting to return. Ethan felt his entire world tilt. Seraya's breath caught. You? She whispered. You're a royal guardian. Ethan didn't understand. Who the hell is this? Seraya's lips barely moved. He was my father's most trusted general. She turned to Ethan, and this time, her voice held something new. Fear. If he's here, that means they want you back. Ethan's fingers tightened around his weapon. They can't have me. The royal guardian smiled. That is not your decision to make. The weight of a forgotten war. The guardian took another step forward, his gaze locked onto Ethan. You think this is coincidence? He asked softly. You think you are here by accident? Ethan gritted his teeth. I don't believe in destiny. The guardian let out a low, amused hum. Neither do I. Then, he lifted his hand. Ethan felt it immediately. The pull. The connection. Like something inside him was being called home. His pulse slowed. His breath hitched. And suddenly, he could see it. A vision. A world of towers bathed in golden light. A throne carved from the bones of fallen gods. And a war. A war that had never ended. A war waiting for its king. Waiting for him. The choice that changes everything. Ethan staggered back, gasping. Seraya caught his arm. Ethan. His vision snapped back to the desert, to the warships, to the guardian watching him with calm certainty. You were never meant to be just human, the guardian said. You are the last heir, the lost ruler of a broken empire. His silver eyes darkened. And now, you must choose. Silence. Ethan's heart pounded. Seraya's grip tightened on him. You don't have to listen to them, she whispered. Ethan looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, but also hope. She had spent her life believing she was the last. Now she knew she wasn't alone. But did that mean he had to become their king? Ethan clenched his fists. Give me one reason, he said slowly, why I shouldn't fight all of you right now. The guardian smiled. Because, my king. He gestured toward the sky, where more ships were appearing. Your enemies have already chosen for you. The king who refused to kneel. The desert wind howled, whipping against Ethan's face. The sky above was no longer empty. More ships, too many to count. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here for war. The royal guardian stood motionless, his gaze locked onto Ethan like he was waiting. Waiting for Ethan to kneel, to submit, to become the king they wanted him to be. Ethan clenched his fists. I don't belong to you. The guardian's expression didn't change. You belong to history. Ethan felt it again. The pull, the memories that weren't his, the visions of a throne he had never sat upon, a kingdom that had died waiting for him. Seraya grabbed his arm. Ethan, we need to leave. Now. The guardian exhaled. You cannot run from what you are. Ethan glared at him. Watch me. Then, he moved. The break from fate. Ethan grabbed Seraya's wrist and bolted toward the dunes. The air shook as the first warship fired. A shockwave of energy slammed into the ground behind them, sending sand erupting into the sky. Ethan barely had time to react before figures began dropping from the warships. Armored soldiers. Hundreds of them. Seraya cursed. They're deploying the Legion. Ethan kept running. And what does that mean? She didn't answer, because he was about to find out. The ones who do not speak. The Legion moved like ghosts. Silent. Precise. Their armor was sleek, polished, their weapons not of metal, but of energy itself. Ethan knew instantly that they weren't ordinary soldiers. They were programmed, perfect, efficient, and they were here to take him. Seraya skidded to a halt, spinning to face them. "We have to fight." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Then let's make it quick." The first soldier lunged, and Ethan moved faster than he ever had before. The power that shouldn't exist. His body reacted on its own. His veins ignited with golden energy. He wasn't just moving fast. He was predicting their attacks before they even happened. The first soldier swung its blade. Ethan dodged, too fast. Then countered. His fist connected with the soldier's chest. A normal punch shouldn't have done anything. But the moment Ethan made contact, a pulse of golden energy exploded outward. The soldier was thrown back 30 feet. Ethan froze. What the hell was that? Seraya stared at him. "Your blood," she whispered. "It's waking up." Ethan didn't have time to process that, because the rest of the Legion was already upon them. A war that was always waiting. The next few minutes were a blur. Seraya moved like a storm, her twin blades slicing through the enemy with surgical precision. Ethan, he didn't even need a weapon. He was the weapon. Every time he struck, golden energy surged through his limbs. Every move felt familiar, like he had trained for this his whole life. And yet, he had never fought like this before. The truth settled over him like a weight. This wasn't just power. It was memory. He wasn't learning. He was remembering. And that terrified him. The Guardian's warning. The battle raged on. But Ethan knew they were outnumbered. For every soldier they took down, more landed. They wouldn't win this. Not like this. And then, the Guardian spoke again. His voice echoed through the battlefield, calm and absolute. "Enough." The Legion stopped. Instantly, like puppets whose strings had been cut. Ethan exhaled sharply, his body still burning with power. The Guardian stepped forward, his eyes locked onto Ethan. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly. Ethan didn't answer. The Guardian nodded, as if he already knew. "This war was never about your choice." He tilted his head. "It was about what was always inside you." Ethan's breathing slowed. The golden glow on his skin was fading now. But he could still feel it. The truth. The power. The throne. It wasn't something he could escape, because it had always been a part of him. The choice that was never his to make. Seraya grabbed his wrist. "We have to leave." Ethan turned to her. She looked scared, not of the Guardian, of him. Ethan clenched his fists. Then he looked back at the Guardian. And for the first time, he asked the question he had been avoiding. "If I take the throne, what happens?" The Guardian's silver eyes gleamed. "You will become what you were always meant to be." Ethan inhaled slowly. "And if I refuse?" The Guardian smiled. "Then the war continues until the last star burns out." Silence. Seraya's grip on his wrist tightened. Ethan exhaled. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a leader. He was just a man who had tried to save a dying stranger in the sand. And now the entire galaxy was waiting for his answer. His heart pounded. His blood hummed. And Ethan finally understood. This wasn't about power, or war, or even fate. This was about who he was willing to become. Ethan met the Guardian's gaze, and for the first time, he didn't run. He made his choice. "Then let's end this war." The war for the throne. The desert was silent. For the first time since Ethan had landed on this forsaken planet, there were no explosions, no soldiers rushing forward, no warships shaking the sky. Just waiting. The Royal Guardian stood before him, his gaze steady, his voice calm. "Then let's end this war." Ethan's own words echoed back at him. His blood hummed with power. the golden glow beneath his skin fading but still present. Seraya stood beside him, her silver eyes filled with a storm of emotions. Fear, hope, something in between. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Because he did. The throne that never died. The guardian lifted a single hand, and the desert itself began to change. The sand beneath them trembled, shifting, twisting, revealing something buried. Ethan staggered back. Beneath the dunes, an ancient city was rising. Towers of dark stone, golden engravings pulsing with light. Massive gates, once lost beneath the shifting sands, now standing tall once more. And at the heart of it all, a throne. Not just a seat of power, a source of it. Ethan felt it calling to him. The energy of his blood answered. Seraya's breath hitched. "I thought it was destroyed." The guardian's expression remained unreadable. "The throne is eternal," he said, "just like the bloodline." He turned back to Ethan. "Sit upon it, and you will remember everything." The one who should have ruled. Ethan took a slow step forward. The energy in the air was thick, ancient, electric. Something inside him, the part that had awakened when Seraya bonded with him, knew what would happen next. The moment he sat on that throne, he would no longer be Ethan Walker. He would be something else. Someone else. The last king. The lost ruler. And once he became that person, there would be no turning back. Ethan clenched his fists. "I don't need to remember," he said. The guardian tilted his head. "Then how will you lead?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "By doing what no king before me ever did." He stepped forward, but not toward the throne. Toward the guardian. The guardian didn't move. Ethan's voice was calm. "I'm not here to sit on that throne." He held up his glowing hands. "I'm here to break it." The Thronebreaker, a future of his own making. The war was over. Not through battle, not through conquest, but by breaking the very thing that had fueled it. Ethan looked at the people around him. The soldiers, the guardian, Seraya. They weren't looking at him as a ruler. They were looking at him as a leader. Not because of his blood, not because of a throne, but because he chose something different. Seraya took a slow step forward. "What now?" she whispered. Ethan exhaled. Then he smirked. "Now." He glanced up at the sky. "We rebuild." Epilogue. The king without a throne. The desert winds carried a new song. A story not of war, but of change. The throne was gone, but the people remained. And among them stood a human who was never meant to be part of this world. A king who had never wanted to rule. A man who had simply saved a dying stranger in the sand. And in doing so, he had changed the fate of an entire civilization. Forever.